This is TWiT.
We now know there will be we knew there'd be a keynote. We know what time, 10 a.m. on Monday. WWDC 2020 kicks off. I presume it's Tim Apple, but we do know it's coming from the Steve Jobs Theater. And I'm thrilled, excited, more excited than I have been in a while for WWDC.
Something new, something different.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's one of the things that might be even make it more interesting is the idea of, do they do the entire keynote live, or do they have some stuff pre-taped? In which case they could have a much, much deeper bench of talent to draw upon, or they might be able to give far, far more substantive information and demonstrations from there. So it's sort of like just like it was exciting for the first couple of weeks to see like Jimmy Fallon and everybody, all the late night hosts have to do shows from their rooms, from their bedrooms that they've never done before. It's going to be interesting to see Apple try to give this keynote without like 3,000 cheering people, of which like 500 to 800 are like Apple people. They won't have to be able to insert applause breaks into the script for the keynote.
The Microsoft developer event had a mix. Some of the stuff was pre-recorded and some of it was live. Maybe it's just me, but I could always tell when it was pre-recorded because the energy was worse. It just felt canned. The live stuff that Microsoft did, including their main keynote with Scott Hanselman, was fantastic because it was live.
Well, I think that there's a subtle energy that you get from doing a live event that is just really hard to produce when you start to now have control over every perfect edit and all the close-ups and everything else, and it's been rehearsed. It just doesn't feel the same. You can make something that's great, but you then have to make it much better. So I think that when you don't do live, you really have to up the production value. You can't just do a stage version pre-recorded and have it have the same energy as the live version of that. So, I think we talked in the past about Connections. Connections is great. It's not live. He figured it all out, but it's very well produced.
No, absolutely.
But
some of the best television, most of it is not live. But I think for a presentation like a keynote, it's noticeable. I prefer live.
Well, the question is, do we need a presentation like a keynote? But that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
In one way, I think we do, though, because we need to be Apple likes to kind of like be in control of the story that's being told. They like to have the narrative, and if they don't give us the narrative to talk about and write about, then we just kind of make it up as we go along, and it may not kind of fit what they wanted us to know about something. So for new features in an operating system or something like that, if they just said, here's a list of all the new features, nothing would get called attention to it, so that we wouldn't know what to assume would be like the most important feature. So I do think a keynote is important to generate the kind of buzz that Apple's really good at.
I think you could make one. Also, the thing is, you could take all I would say is that you could take a 2-hour keynote, you could cut it down and create a highly produced 1 hour that would say all the things that you want to say very fast, but it would look like a real show, rather than trying to have it be people up there trying to do the best they can at presenting.
Yeah. I don't know. I think
Go ahead, Andy.
That's good. And we have seen what happens when you try to create a big launch that has a lot of subtle things to it without having an organized, like, hour-long. Where the company knows that that this is propaganda, but nonetheless this is at least the propaganda that it's interesting to see what features and what technologies they specifically want to highlight. Google got the double whammy of they were going to announce Android 11 during the May Google I/O. That got canceled because of coronavirus. Then they were going to have Android 11 as a big live launch event on YouTube, but then they decided out of good taste to cancel that because of the Black Lives Matter protest. And so they were left essentially with just a whole bunch of developer-oriented videos posted to YouTube and a blog post, and that left a big gap for commentators to have to say, okay, well, now we have the beta. Now we're going to have to explain on our own terms what doesn't matter what Google thinks is important. Doesn't matter how Google shows something off. We're going to have to dig through this ourselves and come up with our own explanations.
That's what a keynote really is.
This is not a bad thing.
That's what a keynote is. It's spin. It's context. I mean, there's two ways to put it. So I would say it's spin, but it's contextualization, right, Lori? It's telling people what's important.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this is.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lori. I interrupted.
This is exactly what I'm saying, that, Apple likes to make sure that they kind of have control over how this information is presented to us. We can disseminate it all we want afterward, but they're the ones who are going to say stuff like, there's a new ECG feature or a new sleep feature on the iPhone or on the Watch OS. They're going to call attention to that because they worked on it. They think it's a great feature. They want to push that feature. If they just give us a big list of things, we have to figure out of the hundreds and hundreds of features, which ones are the most important ones. They want to tell us which ones are the most important ones. And then later we get to kind of weed through all the other stuff and find other features we think are fun. But out of the gate, and all keynotes are this, they wouldn't live stream them if they weren't meant as a marketing tactic to get us interested in what's to come.
Yeah.
Well, and in a lot of ways, the keynotes are still for the press in some ways, because if for a long time Apple didn't live stream them. That's Leo live streamed them from the events. So
the late Leo.
But I think
the former journalist known as Leo. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that for a while Apple decided that they were only going to put press in that position and then spin it just to the press. So I do agree with you that a lot, because in reality, from a pure popular perspective, the most viewed thing is usually the highlight reel, the 10 or the 8 or 10 minutes of just tell me what you actually released. Yeah. Is all most people want to walk through.
Is that the biggest view numbers? I guess that makes sense.
If you look on YouTube, I think those numbers are pretty high.
So we're so obsessive, we watch every freaking minute of it. We analyze it, we watch it again.
And we freeze frame it and look at the words on the screen and see what that means.
Literally. Yeah, we do. That's one of the reasons I don't mind not being in the room, because I think you get it. It's just like watching a baseball game in the stands versus at home. You get the ambiance and the fun and the smell of the popcorn and the crowd at the game. But if you really want to see what's going on, the television coverage is always the best way to watch.
Absolutely, and from a commentary perspective, it's much easier to do commentary on the keynote because it's not moving very fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to say, there is a range. Google's developers conference is always a little bit for developers and a little bit for the press. Microsoft's this year was really for developers. They made no pretense. Even when Satya Nadella was talking, it really wasn't it was certainly not if it was intended for the press, it wasn't very effective. Apple is kind of on the other side of the spectrum. Everything Apple does is about marketing, even to developers. And then they have the stuff on the side that you don't see. But when they stream, that's for the press. That's for the people.
And I believe that they're streaming all the things they normally stream on the first day of WW, which is they'll have the keynote, which is
like
very
3 different.
But then there's the State of the Union, and then there is the awards. Is that right? Are those
the awards is actually happening on the 29th.
29th, but they have 3 events that usually happen on that first day, and I think that those are all being streaming. And what they do is the second 2 tend to be very developer focused, and not really publicly focused. So they have a couple more opportunities to talk to the developers, but the first one is definitely for the developers, but leaning towards the press, and then the other ones start to get much more into the nitty gritty. And then, of course, you have a whole week of getting really into the weeds.
And it's interesting because I think Apple really has come around. For a while, they didn't stream any of these. Now it's on this is the Apple website. And they're saying, not just to developers, to everybody, add to your calendar so you can watch the keynote. I mean, they really want everybody to watch, I think.